Alarms tore through the bridge before I even finished my caffeine ration. Red light washed over every console, and my hands were already moving across the sensor array before my mind had caught up with what they were doing. "Unknown contact, bearing 317, I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. It just dropped out of slipspace inside the border buffer. No warning, no signature match. Commander Yorin Adast leaned over my shoulder, his 4 eyes narrowing at the display. "Impossible. Nothing drops that close without triggering the outer sensors first." "It did," I said. "I have the data right here. My name is Ilarion Fess, and I have served as a sensor officer aboard the Varellan Dominion flagship Aegis Crown for 6 cycles. In that time I have tracked pirate raiders, rogue asteroids, and even a runaway mining freighter that nearly took out a fueling station. I had never, not once, felt my hands shake while reading a scope. They were shaking now. The object on my screen was small, smaller than a standard patrol cruiser, barely a third the size of our flagship. By every rule of proportion, it should have looked harmless, almost pitiful, drifting there in the dark between star systems. But something about its shape refused to sit right in my mind. The hull was smooth, unbroken by the usual armor plating or weapon blisters we expected on any serious vessel. It looked less like a warship and more like a single, polished stone thrown into space by some careless hand. "Get me a clean visual," Adast ordered. The image sharpened on the main view screen, a silver-gray hull, seamless, catching starlight along gentle curves. No visible engines, no visible weapons, and yet every proximity sensor screamed that this thing was close enough to touch us, though it had not been detected approaching at all. "Where did it come from?" someone behind me whispered. Nobody answered. Captain Belrose Cade, our commanding officer, folded his hands within his robe of office as he studied the screen. "Hail it," he said calmly. "Standard border protocol. Identify yourself or be boarded." I sent the signal myself, layering it with the 3 most common trade languages of this sector, plus the old imperial dialect used for first contact situations. Silence answered us. Not the silence of distance or delay, but the silence of something choosing not to speak. "Send a warning shot," Cade said after a long pause. "Non-lethal spread, forward of the bow. Let them know we are serious." I did not like giving that order life through my console, but duty is duty. A streak of light lanced from our forward battery and crossed in front of the unknown ship's nose, close enough to rattle any sane crew into responding. The silver ship did not move. It did not flinch, did not power up defensive shields that we could detect, did not so much as shift its drift angle by a single degree. It simply sat there, as though our warning shot had been nothing more than a passing comet. "Diagnostics," Cade snapped. "Did our shot even register?" "It registered," I confirmed, checking the telemetry twice to be sure of what I was seeing. "It passed exactly where we aimed it. The ship simply did not care." A murmur rippled through the bridge crew. I had served with these people long enough to know the sound of controlled fear when I heard it. Nobody wanted to say what we were all thinking, that a ship this small should not have been able to ignore a shot across its bow without so much as raising a shield. "Try again," Cade ordered, his voice a touch less steady now. "Closer this time." Before I could send the command, my console chimed with an incoming transmission. Not a distress call, not a demand, not even a threat, just an open audio channel, requesting nothing more than to be heard. Cade's eyes met mine. "Put it through." The voice that came out of the speakers was calm, unbothered, almost gentle, the way someone might speak while explaining directions to a lost traveler rather than addressing an entire warship bristling with weapons. "You can stop firing at me now," the voice said. It was a woman's voice, low and even. "I heard you the first time." Nobody on the bridge spoke. I felt the hair along my scalp ridge stand up, though I could not have told you why. "Identify yourself," Cade said, forcing authority into his tone. "Captain Grace Ellison," the voice replied simply. "Scout vessel Halcyon, registered to the Sol Compact. I'm not looking for trouble. I'm passing through on a survey route. If you'll check your charts, this lane has been marked as neutral for the last few decades." Cade turned to his adjutant. "Do we have any record of a sole compact treaty regarding this lane?" The adjutant's fingers flew across his console, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to something closer to alarm. "Captain, there is a treaty. It's old, older than most of the crew on this ship. It was signed under a classification protocol I don't have clearance to view." "Then get clearance," Cade snapped. "I can't, sir. The clearance level required is higher than yours." The bridge went quiet in a way I had never experienced before, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears like the vacuum outside the hull. Every officer present understood the same unsettling truth at once. Whatever this treaty was, whatever this ship represented, it sat above the authority of our own captain. That alone was more frightening to me than any weapon I had ever seen. "Ma'am," Cade said, choosing his next words with visible care, "you are currently inside a contested border region. For your own safety, I must ask you to alter course and depart peacefully." There was a pause on the other end, brief but noticeable, as though the woman on the line was considering how to phrase her reply so that it would not sound like an insult. "I appreciate the concern," she said, "but I'm not in any danger here. I'll finish my survey pass and be on my way within the hour. No need to trouble your crew further." "That is not a request I can accept," Cade said. "This is Imperial territory." "It's shared territory," she corrected, still calm. "Check the treaty again. Section on transit rights." I really don't want this to become complicated. I glanced sideways at Adast, who was staring at the silver ship on our view screen as though trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit. "Sensors show no weapons charging," he murmured to me, low enough that only I could hear. "No shields raised, no engines burning beyond minimal station keeping. She is just sitting there, talking to us like we are the ones who might be overreacting." "Maybe we are," I whispered back, though the words tasted strange in my mouth. Cade cut the channel and turned to his senior staff, his composure cracking at the edges for the first time since the alert had sounded. "Someone tell me what the Sol Compact is. Now, I do not care about clearance levels. I want answers before I decide how to proceed." Nobody spoke immediately. Then Lieutenant Sylvain O'Duke, our junior tactical officer, cleared her throat. "Sir, I studied ancient border conflicts during officer training. There was a species referenced only in redacted case files. Humans. My instructor mentioned them exactly once, then told the class to never bring the subject up again. He said it was a topic best left buried." "Buried why?" Cade asked. "I don't know, sir. He wouldn't say, but I remember his exact reaction. He looked afraid, not the way officers get nervous before an inspection. Afraid the way you get when you remember something you wish you could forget." The silence that followed felt heavier than before. On the view screen, the small silver ship continued its slow, unhurried drift, utterly indifferent to the storm of anxiety it had created aboard our vessel. "Contact Fleet Command," Cade said finally. "Tell them we have an unidentified vessel inside the border buffer. Request for identification confirms species designation human, and request immediate guidance." The communications officer worked quickly, and within a few minutes, a response came through, though it was not at all what any of us expected. It was not a data packet full of tactical advice or historical records. It was a live transmission, direct from someone several ranks above our captain, someone whose face appeared on our secondary screen, looking distinctly unsettled. "Captain Cade," the officer said without preamble, "confirm your last transmission. You are reporting contact with a vessel identified as human." "Confirmed," Cade replied. "The vessel is small, unarmed as far as our sensors can determine, and the pilot has been entirely cooperative in conversation. I request permission to escort it out of the buffer zone, by force, if necessary." The officer on the screen went pale, a shade of gray I had never seen on a Varellan face before. "Do not," he said, his voice suddenly sharp with urgency. "Do not use force. Do not fire another warning shot. Maintain distance, remain polite, and await further instructions. This has been escalated beyond my authority." "Escalated to whom?" Cade demanded. "To the Dominion Council," the officer said, and then the transmission cut before Cade could ask anything further. I sat there at my console, staring at the tiny silver ship that had, in less than 20 minutes, managed to turn our entire chain of command upside down without firing a single shot or raising a single shield. My scope told me it was harmless. Every instinct I had built over 6 cycles of service told me otherwise. Something about the calm in that woman's voice, something about the effortless way she had shrugged off our warning shot, told me that harmless was very much the wrong word. "Sir," I said quietly, "should I keep tracking her?" Cade did not look away from the view screen. "Keep tracking her," he said, "and Ilarion, if anything changes, anything at all, no matter how small it seems, you tell me immediately." "Yes, sir," I said, and turned back to my console, watching the silver ship drift there in the void, patient and quiet, while somewhere far above us, an entire council of admirals was apparently deciding what to do about a single scout vessel that refused to be afraid of us. I did not know it yet, but that quiet, patient ship was about to teach the entire Dominion a lesson none of us would ever forget. The order came down within the hour, and it was unlike any order I had received in my entire service record. We were to hold position, maintain full sensor tracking, and under no circumstances approach, threaten, or engage the vessel designated Halcyon. Captain Cade read the message twice before setting his datapad down on the console with a soft, defeated click. "They want us to babysit a scout ship," Adost muttered beside me. "One unarmed vessel, and Fleet Command wants a full cruiser standing guard like it's some kind of unexploded ordnance. Maybe that's exactly what it is," I said, and I meant it more seriously than the joke deserved. Cade turned to the room. "Ilarion, Sylvain, with me, Records Division. I want everything we have on this species, human, Sol compact, all of it, and I want it now." The Records Division of a starship like the Aegis Crown is not a glamorous place. It is a cramped chamber lined with humming data cores, staffed by 2 archivists who spend most of their careers cataloging supply manifests and crew rotations. When we arrived, both archivists looked up with the kind of nervous energy that suggested word of the encounter had already spread through the ship faster than any official channel could manage. "Captain," the senior archivist said, rising quickly, "we heard there was contact. Is it true?" "Is it really? Pull every file you have on the species designation human," Cade said, cutting through the question. "Sol compact. Any treaties, any historical engagements, anything at all." The archivist's fingers trembled slightly as she entered the search command. The console blinked, processed, and then returned a result that made her frown in confusion. "Sir, most of the files are locked behind a classification tier I don't have access to. I can see file headers, but the contents are restricted." "Then show me the headers," Cade said. She turned the screen so we could see. Dozens of entries scrolled past, dated across centuries of Dominion history. Diplomatic incident, Third Rim colony, border skirmish, outpost Varn, ceasefire agreement, Sol compact, withdrawal order, all forces, permanent quarantine directive, human species. Each entry more unsettling than the last, and every single one locked away from view. "There has to be a summary somewhere," Cade said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Something an officer of my rank should be able to access." The junior archivist, a nervous young Varellan named Torek, spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, there is one file that isn't locked. It's old, and it's not classified, because it was written for public education purposes. It's meant to be a warning, not a secret." "Pull it up," Cade said. The file opened, and I leaned forward to read alongside my captain. It was a training document, the kind given to cadets during basic education, written in the plain, simplified language meant for young minds still learning the shape of the galaxy. The title alone was enough to make my stomach tighten. Species Advisory, Humanity. Threat Classification, Do Not Provoke. The text beneath it was brief, almost frustratingly so, considering the weight of the words. It described humans as originating from a single world called Earth, a planet the Dominion had encountered many generations ago during a routine expansion survey. It described a brief period of contact, followed by what the document vaguely called a misunderstanding, and then, without further explanation, a ceasefire that the Dominion had requested. "We requested the ceasefire," Sylvain said quietly, reading over my shoulder. "Not them. We asked them to stop." "Stop what?" Cade asked, though I do not think he expected an answer, since the document offered none. The final section of the file was the part that stayed with me longest. It read simply, "Humans do not seek conflict, and are known to extend patience and courtesy even to those who have wronged them. However, should courtesy fail to resolve a dispute, human military response has historically been swift, precise, and difficult to predict using standard tactical models. All Dominion personnel are advised to treat any human vessel, regardless of apparent size or armament, as a full threat until proven otherwise." "That's it?" Cade said, staring at the screen. "That's the entire advisory? Be polite, or else, with no explanation of what else means?" "Sir," Torek said carefully, "I think that's the point. They don't want cadets asking questions about what happened. They just want us to remember not to provoke them." I thought about the calm voice on our comm channel, the way Captain Ellison had spoken to us, as though we were the ones being unreasonable, not her. I thought about how she had shrugged off our warning shot as if it were nothing more than a rude gesture rather than an act of aggression. If that composure represented the human idea of courtesy, I found myself deeply reluctant to imagine what their idea of a serious response might look like. "There has to be more," Cade said. "Someone on this ship must have deeper access. Adast, contact Fleet Command again. I want to speak to someone who actually remembers what happened, not another cadet advisory written to frighten children into good behavior." It took nearly 2 hours for Fleet Command to arrange the connection Cade requested, and when it finally came through, the face on our screen was not a young officer, but an elderly Varellan wearing the insignia of a retired fleet historian. His name, according to the caption beneath his image, was Consul Vontrell Ash, and he looked as though he had been pulled from a comfortable retirement to answer questions he clearly did not want to discuss. "Captain Cade," he said, his voice carrying the particular weariness of someone who had been asked this question many times before and had never enjoyed answering it. "I understand you've made contact with a human vessel." "Yes, Consul. I'm hoping you can explain the classified files we're unable to access. Specifically, the nature of our previous conflict with this species." Ash was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting somewhere off camera, as though gathering the will to speak. "It was a long time ago," he said finally, "before either of us were born. The Dominion encountered a small human colony during an expansion survey along what we now call the Sol border. Our survey commander at the time believed the colony to be undefended, given how few ships patrolled the area." "And?" Cade prompted gently. "And he was wrong," Ash said simply. "Terribly wrong. The colony was not undefended. It was simply calm, in the same way you've likely already noticed in your own encounter. Our commander mistook that calm for weakness, and he acted on that assumption." "What happened?" Sylvain asked, unable to hold back the question. Ash's expression tightened. "I am not permitted to give you tactical details, even now, even after all this time. What I can tell you is that the engagement lasted less than a full rotation cycle, and by the end of it, our forces requested a ceasefire, not because we were ordered to, because there was very little left to fight with." The bridge, or in this case, the records chamber, fell utterly silent. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest, the kind that comes not from immediate danger, but from the slow realization that the danger you thought you understood is far larger and far older than you had imagined. "How many ships did we lose?" Cade asked quietly. "More than I am willing to say aloud," Ash replied. "What matters is not the number, Captain. What matters is what came afterward. The human government, rather than pressing their advantage, offered us peace. Not surrender terms, not tribute. Simple, boring peace, along with a firm request that we never test their patience again. Our leadership at the time was so unsettled by the mercy shown to us that they created the quarantine directive you've likely seen referenced. Full avoidance of human territory and strict protocols for any accidental contact. That's why the treaty exists, Sylvain murmured. That's why the lane is marked neutral. Precisely, Ash said. And that, Captain, is why I strongly suggest you follow whatever instructions Fleet Command has given you regarding this vessel. If a single human is willing to sit calmly while your ship fires warning shots across her bow, it is not because she lacks the ability to respond. It is because she has chosen not to, and I promise you, that choice can change in an instant if given sufficient reason. Cade absorbed this for a long moment before speaking again. Consul, is there any indication of what her actual capabilities might be? Our sensors show a vessel a fraction the size of our own cruiser. Ash allowed himself something close to a tired smile. Captain, if there is one lesson this species has taught us, it is that their strength was never about size. During the original engagement, the vessels that inflicted the most damage on our fleet were smaller than half of what you're currently tracking. I would not measure this ship's danger by its dimensions. Understood, Cade said, though his voice betrayed just how little comfort that understanding brought him. One more thing, Ash added, just before the connection began to fade. Do not mistake her patience for permission. If she asks you to stand down, stand down. If she asks for space, give her space. The moment your fleet stops respecting that courtesy is the moment you may find out exactly what the rest of that classified file was trying so carefully not to describe. The transmission ended, leaving the three of us standing in the quiet hum of the records chamber, surrounded by locked files and unanswered questions. I thought of the little silver ship, still drifting calmly somewhere beyond our hull, patient as still water, and I understood for the first time that the true danger aboard our vessel that day was not the human ship at all. It was the temptation, sitting quietly in the back of every officer's mind, to forget the warning we had just been given. Cade straightened his uniform and turned toward the door. Back to the bridge, he said, and someone tell Fleet Command we understand the situation. Fully. As we walked back through the corridors, I noticed something in Cade's posture that had not been there before, a kind of careful restraint replacing his earlier frustration. I understood it because I felt the same shift settling over my own thoughts. We had come looking for information that would explain why a single unarmed ship had thrown our entire chain of command into disarray. What we found instead was proof that the comm on that ship's comm channel was not an absence of power, but the presence of something far more deliberate and far more unsettling than any weapon we could have detected on our scopes. Whatever happened next, I knew we would be watching that silver ship far more carefully than before, and praying quietly that nothing aboard our own vessel gave Captain Grace Ellison any reason to stop being patient with us. Word of Consul Ash's warning should have traveled up the chain of command quickly enough to prevent what happened next. It did not. Somewhere between our records chamber and the higher offices of Fleet Headquarters, caution lost a battle against pride, and a decision was made that none of us on the Aegis Crown had any say in. New orders, Adast said, reading from his console with a tightness in his voice that told me the news was not good. Fleet Command is dispatching a full battle group to our position. We are to hold formation and assist in escorting the human vessel out of Dominion space by whatever means necessary. By whatever means, Cade repeated slowly. That's not what Consul Ash recommended. No, sir, Adast agreed. It isn't. Within 3 hours, 4 additional cruisers dropped out of slipspace around us, forming a loose ring with the Aegis Crown at its center, and the small silver ship still drifting calmly in the middle of it all. I watched the tactical display fill with friendly markers, 5 Dominion warships arranged around a single scout vessel that had, as far as our sensors could tell, still not raised a single shield or charged a single weapon. She hasn't moved, Sylvain said from her station, disbelief coloring her voice. 5 cruisers just surrounded her, and she hasn't even adjusted her drift. Admiral Torvain Kessig, commanding the newly arrived battle group, opened a channel to the human vessel without consulting Cade first, which told me everything I needed to know about how this encounter was likely to unfold. Human vessel Halcyon. Kessig's voice boomed over the open channel, carrying the confident authority of someone who had clearly not read the file we had spent the last several hours studying. You are ordered to power down your engines and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Failure to comply will be considered a hostile act. There was a pause before Captain Ellison's voice returned, and this time I noticed something new in her tone. Not anger, not fear, something closer to disappointment, the kind of tired patience a teacher might show toward a student who kept making the same mistake despite repeated corrections. "I already explained my situation to your colleague," she said. "I have transit rights under an existing treaty. I'm not going to power down, and I'm certainly not going to allow boarding. I'd really prefer we not do this." "You do not give orders to Dominion forces," Kessig snapped. "Power down immediately, or we will disable your vessel by force." "That would be a mistake," Ellison replied simply. Kessig, apparently unwilling to be lectured by a lone scout pilot in front of his newly assembled fleet, gave the order I suspect he had been eager to give from the moment he arrived. "Target her engines, disabling fire only. Let's see how confident she remains once she's drifting without propulsion." I watched from my station as 3 of the 5 cruisers opened fire simultaneously, weapons converging on the small silver ship from multiple angles. It should have been an overwhelming barrage, more than enough firepower to strip the shields off a vessel that size several times over. The beams struck something before they ever reached the hull. A shimmer of pale light bloomed around the Halcyon, catching each shot and scattering it harmlessly into the void, as effortless as a held hand blocking a light breeze. The entire barrage lasted less than 2 seconds, and when it ended, the small ship had not moved so much as a meter from its original position. Silence gripped the bridge. Even Kessig, visible on our secondary display, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "Shields at full strength," I reported, my voice steadier than I expected it to be, though my hands were not. "No damage detected. She didn't even reroute power to compensate. It's as if our weapons barely registered." "Fire again," Kessig ordered, though his confidence had visibly thinned. "Full spread, all batteries." This time, all 5 cruisers fired together, a coordinated barrage that lit up the surrounding space with enough concentrated energy to have vaporized a much larger target. Once again, the pale shimmer absorbed every shot without so much as flickering under the strain. "Captain Ellison," Cade said quickly, cutting into the channel before Kessig could order a third volley. "Please, we need you to understand this is not the full Dominion position. I would ask that you allow us a moment to de-escalate this situation." There was a brief pause, and when Ellison spoke again, her voice had lost its patient edge, replaced by something firmer, though still remarkably controlled given the circumstances. "Captain Cade, I appreciate that you're trying, but your admiral just ordered 2 full volleys at a vessel that never threatened him. I think it's time I made my position a little clearer." Before anyone could respond, the tactical display in front of me lit up with a cascade of warnings. Not from the Halcyon's weapons, since we detected no outgoing fire at all, but from our own systems. One by one, across all 5 cruisers, engine readouts flickered and dropped to 0. Shield generators along the battle group reported sudden, unexplained power failures. Weapon batteries that had just fired reported complete loss of charge, as though every capacitor aboard each ship had been drained in the span of a single breath. "What's happening?" Kessig's voice cracked through the open channel, no longer carrying any trace of his earlier bravado. "Sir," his own tactical officer reported, audible even to us, "we've lost main engine power fleet-wide. Shields are down. Weapons are offline. I don't understand how. There's no impact signature, no boarding attempt, nothing on sensors." "She didn't fire a single shot," I said quietly, watching my own readouts confirm the same failures spreading through our sister ships, though the Aegis Crown itself remained untouched, its systems fully operational. "She just turned everything off." "Not everything," Ellison's voice said calmly over the open channel, addressing the entire battle group now, rather than any single ship. Life support is untouched on every vessel. Nobody is in danger. I simply removed your ability to fire on me again, and while I was at it, your ability to fire on anyone else nearby. Consider it a temporary inconvenience rather than a punishment." "How is this possible?" Kessig demanded, though the fight had clearly drained out of his voice, replaced by something closer to disbelief. "You're one ship. You have no visible weapons." "I never said I didn't have weapons," Ellison replied. "I said I'd rather not use them. There's a difference, and I'd appreciate it if your fleet remembered that distinction going forward." I glanced at Cade, whose expression had shifted from professional concern into something far more sober, the look of a man watching his worst assumptions confirmed in real time. "She left us untouched," he murmured, almost to himself. "Why leave the Aegis Crown operational while disabling the rest of the group?" I did not have an answer, though a suspicion was forming in the back of my mind, one I would not have the confidence to voice aloud until much later. Across the open channel, Admiral Kessig's voice returned, quieter now, stripped of its earlier command. "Captain Ellison, I am formally requesting a cessation of hostilities. Please restore power to our vessels. We will withdraw the battle group immediately." "That's all I wanted to hear," Ellison said, and within moments, the tactical readouts across the surrounding cruisers began flickering back to life, engines restarting, shields humming back online, weapon batteries slowly regaining their charge, as though nothing unusual had occurred at all. "I'll be finishing my survey now. I trust there won't be any further misunderstandings." Nobody answered her immediately. The bridge around me sat in stunned quiet, officers staring at readouts that made no logical sense according to any tactical model we had been trained on. 5 warships, fully armed, fully crewed, reduced to helpless drifting hulks by a single scout vessel that had never once raised her voice or fired a shot in anger. "Sir," Sylvain finally said, breaking the silence, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't think that was even close to her full capability. I think she was being careful with us." Cade did not answer right away. He simply stared at the small silver ship on our view screen, drifting there exactly as it had been before the battle group arrived, patient and calm, entirely unbothered by the chaos it had just so effortlessly created among 5 of the Dominion's finest warships. "Stand down," Cade finally ordered, his voice quiet but firm. "Full stand down, and someone get Admiral Kessig on a secure channel. I think it's time we discussed exactly how we intend to explain this incident to Fleet Command, because I do not believe anyone back home is going to enjoy hearing what almost happened here today." I turned back to my console, watching the readings settle as our sister ships slowly regained full function, and I found myself thinking about Consul Ash's warning from earlier that day. "Do not mistake her patience for permission." I understood now, more clearly than I ever had before, exactly what those words meant, and I understood too that we had come far closer to disaster than any of us wanted to admit. The stand-down order should have ended the incident quietly, filed away as another cautionary tale for future cadets to read and quietly fear. Instead, it became the beginning of the most uncomfortable conversation I have ever witnessed take place across an open fleet channel. Admiral Kessig, still visibly shaken from watching his entire battle group go dark without a single hostile shot fired against them, requested a direct conversation with Captain Ellison, this time without any pretense of command or authority in his voice. Cade allowed the channel to route through our bridge so that his own crew could witness whatever followed, a decision I suspect he made deliberately, wanting every officer aboard the Aegis Crown to understand exactly what we had almost provoked. "Captain Ellison," Kessig began, his tone measured and careful in a way it had not been earlier, "I owe you an apology. My actions were reckless, and I put both our forces and yours at unnecessary risk." "I appreciate you saying that," Ellison replied, her voice returning to the calm, even tone she had used at the very start of the encounter. "I'd rather not make a habit of disabling entire fleets. It's not efficient, and honestly, it's not something I enjoy doing. May I ask," Kessig continued, "what exactly your vessel is? Our records classify the Halcyon only as a scout ship, yet you disabled 5 armed cruisers without firing a single weapon we could detect." There was a pause before Ellison answered, and when she did, her voice carried a note of something almost apologetic, as though she understood the weight her next words would carry. "The Halcyon is a survey and diplomatic scout, Admiral, lightly equipped, minimal crew, built for long-range observation rather than combat. What you experienced today wasn't a weapon system in the traditional sense. It's a standard defensive protocol installed on every vessel we send, beyond compact borders, even ships like mine that aren't meant for combat at all." I saw Cade's jaw tighten as the implication settled over him, the same realization spreading silently across every officer present. "You're telling us," Cade said slowly, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice, "that what happened to Admiral Kessig's battle group was accomplished by a standard defensive system, not a weapon, a precaution." "That's correct," Ellison said simply. "Every human vessel that travels beyond our secured territory carries similar safeguards, regardless of its designated purpose. We learned a long time ago that even our least dangerous ships need to be able to protect themselves without requiring a military escort." "Then what?" Sylvain asked quietly, though her question carried clearly enough across the open channel for Ellison to hear. "Would a ship built specifically for combat be capable of?" There was a longer pause this time, and I found myself holding my breath without quite meaning to. "I'd rather not answer that question directly," Ellison said, and for the first time since the encounter began, I heard something in her voice that was not quite discomfort, but close to it, the reluctance of someone choosing not to frighten people who had already been frightened enough for one day. "I don't think it would help this conversation to go there. What matters is that nobody here was hurt, and I have no interest in escalating this any further than it already has." "With respect, Captain," Cade said, "I believe my superiors will want an answer regardless of your reluctance to give one." Ellison was quiet for a moment before responding, and when she did, her tone had shifted into something more thoughtful, almost instructive, the voice of someone trying to explain a difficult truth as gently as she could manage. "Captain Cade, I understand your position, truly, but consider this. If a lightly equipped survey vessel with a skeleton crew was able to neutralize 5 fully armed cruisers without any injury to anyone involved, purely through a standard precaution built into ships that aren't even meant for combat, then I think you already have the answer you're looking for. You don't need me to describe our warships in detail. You need only understand that we build them to never need to prove themselves the way I just had to prove myself today." I glanced around the bridge, watching the weight of her words settle over each officer in turn. Nobody spoke, though I could see the same calculation running behind every set of eyes. The quiet, uncomfortable arithmetic of imagining a fleet built with far greater intention than the humble scout ship currently drifting on our view screen. "Admiral Kessig," Ellison continued, her tone softening slightly, "I don't say any of this to frighten you or your crew. I understand this encounter has been difficult, and I recognize that most of what happened stemmed from a lack of information, rather than any genuine hostility on your part. I'd like to propose something that might help going forward, if you're willing to hear it." "Please," Kessig said, and I noted the genuine relief in his voice at being offered a path forward that did not involve further confrontation. "There's an old treaty between our peoples," Ellison said. "It's rarely referenced these days because most crews on both sides have simply learned to avoid each other's territory, rather than actively engaging with its terms. I think it might be time to revisit it, formally, through proper diplomatic channels rather than through incidents like this one. I'll be filing a report to my own government recommending exactly that. I'd encourage you to do the same with your Dominion Council." Cade exchanged a glance with Adast before responding. "I believe that would be a wise course of action, Captain. I'll ensure my own report reflects the same recommendation." "Good," Ellison said, and there was something almost warm in her tone now, a gentleness that felt strange given everything that had just occurred. "I don't think our peoples need to be enemies, Captain Cade. I think we simply haven't spoken properly in a very long time, and silence tends to grow strange stories in the space where understanding should be. Today didn't need to happen the way it did. I'd like to think it won't happen this way again. I share that hope, Cade said, and I believed him. There was a brief pause before Ellison spoke again, her tone shifting into something lighter, almost conversational, as though the tension of the last several hours had finally begun to ease from her voice. For what it's worth, Captain, your sensor officer did good work today. I noticed the moment your ship stopped following Kessig's lead and started actually listening to what I was saying. That kind of judgment matters more than people realize. I felt my face heat with something between embarrassment and pride, unsure how she could have known anything about my role aboard the ship, yet strangely grateful for the acknowledgement all the same. Thank you, Captain, Cade said on my behalf, glancing toward me with something like approval in his expression. I'll pass that along. I should get back to my survey, Ellison said. I have readings still to collect, and I'd like to finish before your fleet decides to send anyone else out here with itchy trigger fingers. A ripple of quiet, uneasy laughter passed through the bridge, the kind that comes not from genuine humor, but from the release of tension too long held. Even Kessig, still visible on the secondary display, allowed himself a small, tired smile. Safe travels, Captain Ellison, Cade said. And thank you for your patience today. I suspect it was more than we deserved. Patience is easy when nobody actually gets hurt, Ellison replied simply. I'd rather spend my patience keeping it that way than waste it proving a point nobody needed proven. Halcyon out. The channel closed, and the small silver ship on our view screen finally began to move, adjusting its drift with the same effortless grace it had shown from the very first moment we detected it. Sensors sweeping slowly across the surrounding system as it resumed the survey work it had apparently come here to perform all along. No weapons charged, no aggressive maneuvering, just a lone scout ship, calmly finishing the task it had set out to do, entirely unbothered by the chaos it had briefly caused among an entire Dominion battle group. Cade let out a slow breath, the kind that carries the weight of an entire day finally releasing from a person's shoulders. Stand down all stations, he said quietly. Begin drafting the incident report. I want every detail included, especially the parts Fleet Command won't want to hear. As the bridge slowly returned to its normal rhythm, I found myself staring at the silver ship a while longer, watching it drift peacefully through space, as though nothing unusual had occurred at all. I thought about Consul Ash's warning, about the locked files in our archive, about the calm, patient voice that had disabled 5 warships without a single act of true aggression, and I understood, perhaps for the first time in my entire career, just how fragile the line between peace and disaster truly was. We had come dangerously close to crossing it that day, and the only reason we hadn't was because someone on the other side of that line had chosen, again and again, to be patient with us instead. I did not know yet how the rest of the Dominion would react to what had happened here, but I suspected, deep down, that this quiet encounter, in an unremarkable stretch of border space, was about to change far more than any of us currently understood. 3 weeks passed before I understood the full scale of what our small border encounter had set into motion, and by the time I did, the story of the Halcyon had already traveled far beyond the quiet edges of Dominion space where it began. It started with the incident reports. Cade had promised to include every detail Fleet Command would not want to hear, and true to his word, he did exactly that, filing a full account of Admiral Kessig's failed assault, and the effortless, almost gentle way it had been neutralized. I expected the report to vanish into some deep archive, quietly buried the way so many uncomfortable truths in the Dominion tend to be. Instead, within days, our ship received a formal request from the Dominion Council itself, demanding a complete debriefing directly from the officers involved. I found myself standing before a council chamber I had only ever seen through recorded broadcasts, my voice steady despite the nerves twisting through my stomach, describing in detail the shimmer of pale light that had swallowed an entire barrage without so much as a flicker, and the calm, patient voice that had spoken to us as though we were simply misbehaving children rather than an armed threat. The council listened in silence, and when I finished, one of the senior counselors, an elderly Varellan whose name I never learned, asked a single question that seemed to summarize the anxiety of the entire chamber. Officer Thess, in your professional judgment, do you believe that vessel was attempting to provoke conflict with the Dominion? No, I said honestly. I believe she was trying very hard not to. I believe if she had wanted conflict, Admiral Kessig's entire battle group would not have survived the encounter at all. The silence that followed my answer told me everything I needed to know about how deeply that possibility had already settled into the minds of everyone present. In the weeks that followed, the Dominion Council did something I never expected to witness in my lifetime. They opened formal diplomatic contact with the Sol Compact, referencing the very treaty Captain Ellison had mentioned during our encounter, requesting a renewed dialogue between our peoples after generations of careful, deliberate silence. I later learned that the human government responded within days, expressing what the official transcripts described as cautious optimism, along with a gentle reminder that they had never actually wanted the silence to continue in the first place. It was the Dominion, apparently, who had chosen isolation all those generations ago, terrified of provoking a species we barely understood, while humanity had simply waited patiently on the other side of that silence, willing to speak again whenever we found the courage to reach out first. I thought often about Consul Ash's words during those weeks, about mistaking patience for permission, and I began to understand that our entire relationship with humanity had been built on exactly that mistake, repeated across generations, each one inheriting a fear too old and too vague to properly examine, yet powerful enough to shape policy for centuries. The formal reclassification came through fleet-wide channels almost 2 months after our encounter, replacing the old, frightening advisory I had read in our ship's archive with something far more measured. Humans were no longer listed simply as "do not provoke." The new classification read Sol Compact, diplomatic priority, approach with respect and caution. It was a small change in wording, but I understood, having lived through the encounter myself, just how much careful thought had gone into choosing those particular words. Captain Cade received a formal commendation for his handling of the incident, praised specifically for his restraint once the true nature of the situation became clear, a pointed contrast to Admiral Kessig, who was quietly reassigned to a training post far from any active fleet command. Nobody said it directly, but everyone aboard the Aegis Crown understood the message clearly enough. Aggression toward humanity, however well-intentioned, would no longer be tolerated within Dominion command structure. I received a smaller commendation of my own, a simple note added to my service record acknowledging my role in accurately assessing the threat level of the encounter, though I privately felt the credit belonged less to my own judgment and more to the patience of a single human captain who had chosen, again and again, not to escalate a situation that could easily have justified a far harsher response. 6 months after the incident, I found myself assigned to a small diplomatic escort team, tasked with accompanying a Dominion delegation to a neutral station where the first official talks between our two governments were scheduled to take place. It was there, standing quietly near the edge of the meeting hall, that I saw Captain Grace Ellison in person for the first time. She looked entirely unremarkable, which surprised me more than I expected it to. A woman of average height, dressed in a simple gray uniform, without any of the elaborate rank markings our own officers favored, speaking quietly with members of the Dominion delegation as though the encounter months earlier had been nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding between neighbors rather than a moment that had nearly reshaped an entire fleet's understanding of its place in the galaxy. She noticed me eventually, offering a small, polite smile of recognition. "Officer Thess," she said, approaching with an ease that caught me off guard. "I remember your voice from the comm channel. It's good to see the encounter led to something better than it could have." "Captain Ellison," I said, straightening instinctively despite myself. "I wanted to thank you, personally, for your patience that day. I understand now how easily things could have gone differently." "They almost did," she admitted, her voice softer than I remembered from the tense exchange months earlier. "I won't pretend that wasn't a difficult day for me either. Choosing restraint isn't always the easy option, especially when you're the one being fired upon. May I ask you something? I said, surprising myself with the boldness of the question forming in my mind. Of course. That day, you disabled 5 cruisers without ever raising your voice or firing a single offensive shot. I've wondered since then what would have happened if we hadn't stood down, if Admiral Kessig had continued the assault despite everything you'd already shown him. Ellison considered the question for a long moment, her expression thoughtful rather than guarded. Honestly, Officer Thess, I don't know exactly how far it would have gone. I know it wouldn't have needed to go very far. Most conflicts like that end quickly, one way or another, and I've always preferred the way that leaves everyone standing afterward. That's really all I can tell you. That's a frightening answer, I admitted. It's meant to be reassuring, actually, she said, a small, genuine warmth entering her tone. It means we'd rather things end quickly and peacefully than drag out into something neither of us would enjoy. I think your people misunderstood that intention for a very long time, mistaking our patience for hesitation rather than choice. I thought about that phrase for a long while afterward, long after the diplomatic talks concluded and our delegation returned to Dominion space, carrying the first hopeful reports of renewed cooperation between our two peoples, mistaking patience for hesitation rather than choice. It seemed, in many ways, to summarize everything I had learned since that tense morning when a single silver ship had drifted quietly into contested space and refused to be provoked, despite every reason we had given her to respond otherwise. The Dominion Council eventually declassified much of the old historical record regarding humanity, and I read through it slowly over the following months, piecing together the full story that Consul Ash had only hinted at during our brief conversation. It was, as I had come to expect, a story of overwhelming Dominion arrogance meeting quiet, controlled human restraint, resulting in consequences far more severe than our ancestors had ever anticipated, followed by an offer of peace that our leadership at the time had been too frightened to properly accept, choosing isolation instead of understanding. I often wondered what might have happened if that first contact had gone differently, if our ancestors had approached humanity with curiosity rather than assumption, with respect rather than the careless confidence that had cost so many Dominion lives in that first, terrible engagement. I wondered, too, what the galaxy might look like today if generations of unnecessary fear had never been allowed to take root in the first place. But history cannot be rewritten, only understood, and I found comfort in the knowledge that our own generation had finally chosen a different path, however belatedly. The talks between the Dominion and the Sol Compact continued steadily in the months that followed, slow and careful, built on the kind of mutual respect that should have existed between our peoples from the very beginning. I remained aboard the Aegis Crown for 2 more cycles after the incident, eventually transferring to a newly formed diplomatic liaison division tasked with helping bridge the gap of understanding between our two civilizations. It was quiet, careful work, nothing like the dramatic tension of that first encounter, but I found a strange satisfaction in it, knowing that I was helping ensure no future crew would ever need to feel the same fear I had felt that day, staring at readouts that made no sense according to any tactical model we had ever trained against. Sometimes, late in my duty shifts, I would think back to that small silver ship drifting calmly among 5 armed Dominion cruisers, utterly unbothered by the chaos surrounding it, and I would remember the lesson it had taught our entire civilization, whether we had wanted to learn it or not. Strength does not always announce itself through size or aggression. Sometimes it simply waits, calm and patient, choosing peace again and again, until the moment finally comes when peace is no longer the wisest choice available. We had been fortunate, that day in the quiet dark between star systems, that Captain Grace Ellison had chosen patience over force, courtesy over retaliation, and understanding over the kind of swift, decisive response that our ancestors had once experienced firsthand and never truly recovered from. I do not know what would have happened had she chosen differently. I suspect none of us aboard the Aegis Crown ever truly wanted to find out, and I am deeply grateful that we never had to. The galaxy, I came to understand, is filled with quiet forces far greater than the loud, aggressive powers we so often fear. Humanity, as I learned that day and in all the months that followed, was one of the quietest and greatest of them all, and I suspect the wisest thing any civilization can do, when faced with such quiet strength, is simply to listen carefully, respond with respect, and never, ever mistake calm for weakness again.